Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. COVID-19 will cause great disruptions to the global economy, and Bhutan will not be an exception. At such a time, we must exhibit the strength that comes out of our smallness, remain united, and support one another. During such exceptional circumstances, the government will take the responsibility of alleviating any suffering to the people due to the virus. His Majesty the King. Kuzuzong Bola, welcome to your UN House and to the 26th session of Bhutan Dialogues. In the face of COVID-19, like the rest of the world, we in Bhutan are facing big challenges. On behalf of Loden and the United Nations, I would like to commend the people of Bhutan, the Royal Government, but especially those frontline workers within the Ministry of Health and various NGOs who are working to alleviate the challenges that people are facing day to day. Also, we have, together with the Loden Foundation, started to live stream Bhutan Dialogues through Facebook today. Our topic today is Reflections on Education and Enterprise in Bhutan. We are fortunate to have an incredibly insightful speaker in Tenzing Yonten, who is the co-founder and first director of the Royal Thimphu College. He has a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from Yale University. Some people may be surprised to know that he interned at the World Bank in Washington. Our host, Dr. Phuntsho, as you are aware, is the founder of Loden Foundation that supports the development of a vibrant culture of entrepreneurship here in Bhutan. Loden has supported 167 active young entrepreneurs throughout this country. We are fortunate that both Tenzing Yonten and Dr. Phuntsho are on the task force helping to formulate Bhutan's 21st century economic roadmap in concert with the Royal Bhutan government. My closing. If I may suggest everyone following the discussion today to please drop your questions in the chat box. We are very capably supported by Kinga and Sering to take on board your questions, which will ensure that they will be finding the right way to get them answered. And without further ado, let me hand over to Dr. Carmen Tenzing.
Kuzuzong, Director Tenzing, welcome to the 26th session of Bhutan Dialogues and our first session going online. Since our last dialogue, the COVID-19 virus has spread across the world and has created a great deal of inconveniences. We're all facing many different kinds of struggles. We live in challenging times. But such precarious times also keeps us on our toes, makes us think of smart, bold, prompt thoughts and actions. So here at Bhutan Dialogues, that's what we aspire to do, to make people think, to promote this culture of thinking and smart actions. And from what I have known of you in the past few years, you are truly a man of incisive thoughts, articulate in speech and words, and very effective action. So it's a great pleasure for us to have you as a guest for our first online session. In the past sessions, we have also seen a good attendance from RTC students, particularly international students. And this time, finally, we are really pleased to have the director as our guest. And what we often do is we begin by asking our guest to share a bit about his or her background, so that the audience, the live audience in this case, would know where you're coming from. We would like to know what made you who you are today. If you could share from your very rich life the main outstanding sort of events and experiences you had that shaped you. What major milestones in your life have made you who you are?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Karma. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you to the staff out here coming on this day. Very happy to be here to share what I know. If I say a bit about myself, basically I started my education. I was sent out at a very young age. I must have been, I guess, around 5 probably, to kindergarten in Darjeeling. 2 years in kindergarten, 10 years at St. Joseph's, North Point, which was a fantastic institution run by Jesuits. I think learned a tremendous amount there, and very proud to be a North Pointer. I think what we learned stayed with us throughout our lives. After finishing there, came back to Bhutan, Sherapsi, 2 years, finished high school there, and then got a scholarship and went to Yale Berkeley, where I studied mechanical engineering. And that was also a hugely transformative experience. During that time, it was my first time getting, after finishing high school, first time getting on a plane, visiting foreign countries, and then to get to a hotbed of liberalism like Berkeley. It was eye-opening, very transformative, but I think I learned so much from there. And I think that has shaped a lot of my thinking and who I am today. After I came back, joined the civil service. 1993, I joined the Department of Power, although I was from a mechanical engineering background. My first place of work was at Berkeley, up the valley. And later on, I was a project manager in the first rural electrification project that was funded by ADB. So I spent about 6-7 years almost, and then a few other assignments where I picked up a lot about procurement and policy aspects, which later on I think was very useful for me as I ventured out. 1999, I went to Yale, I got my MBA, and I think 2001 was when I left Yale and came back, and of course 2001 was also when 9/11 happened and the whole world changed in a way. I came back and I was given, my brief was at that time, the Electricity Act had just been passed, and they were breaking up this government department called the Department of Power into 3 entities. One was the Department of Energy, which was going to look after the policy aspects. The other was the Bhutan Electricity Authority, which was looking after the regulatory aspects. And the last and the biggest one was the Bhutan Power Corporation, which was looking after the utility aspects and the implementation aspects. And so I was seconded to BPC. I was a general manager for the customer services and distribution. And so I had to look after the distribution of electricity in all the Dzongkhaks. At that time we had 19 Dzongkhaks, Kasa didn't have electricity. And I got to travel a lot during those 4+ years that I was in BPC. And it was a hugely rewarding experience, starting out from government department to corporatizing the whole entity and putting the customer at the center of whatever we do. And we worked on new institutional structures, HR policies, finance, so on and so forth. So much. And later on, I used the learnings from that when we started RTC. So it was a very intense period, and so much change that was going on in the corporate sector at that time. So a lot of the things that we did at that time have become now standard in terms of, for example, we did this performance-based incentive systems, the compacts, more outcome-based performance appraisals, those kinds of things. And so when I think about my time in BPC, and that's the time also I decided to leave the civil service, I think one seminal moment or one transformative moment that happened at that time, and I think all of us would share that, but to me, I really remember that was 17 December 2005 in Tashiangsi, when His Majesty the Fort Gyalpo announced that he would be abdicating. I think, of course, prior to that, His Majesty had decided that we're going to have a new constitution and democracy, and there was consultations going on. He was traveling all around the country, but we always thought that it wasn't real. And I guess in some ways we were in denial, and we thought that, oh, that's in the future, it's really not going to happen. But I can tell you, when we heard that announcement, that was a shock, because knowing His Majesty the Phuntsho Gyalpo, what he says is what he will do, we were no doubt that that was what was going to happen. And that completely, I think, upended, in my example, my whole sort of prospects, or what I thought my career would be, or where I was going. And I always thought that I would finish my career in the civil service. I wrote so also. I look at it funnily enough when I was applying to graduate school, and they have many essays, and one of the essays was, where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? I was absolutely clear. I'm going to come back, work for the government, and continue serving the country in that capacity and finish off as a civil servant. And I had no doubts whatsoever till that day. And that was when it changed. And what it changed was sort of the equation of what you thought, what you valued. In the sense that we were brought up in this system where, we were extremely lucky. We were given a free education, sent out. Entire education was free. And we knew that we had to come back and try and do what we could for the country. And so it was with that idea that we were in the civil service. And we thought that as long as we did our time, worked hard, did our best, we would rise up, become a director, so on and so forth. And that's where you would finish off. And certainly this idea that now with democracy, you may have somebody as your boss perhaps, who might be, less experienced, might know less than you, might not be so motivated, might not be aligned with the overall direction that we were headed in, was quite scary, in the sense that in the previous system, we knew that it was a very legitimate system. We had great leadership, and if you put in your time, there's a meritocracy, and you rose up through. And I think that upended that whole apple cart in a way, and sort of the soul searching of where do I go from here now? And of course, all of us, I think my peers and colleagues and my family, we all felt that, we still need to find a way to contribute and continue and do things. And so in some ways that little bit of shifting in your seats and looking for some other way of continuing the work. And I can say this, that then within 2 years of that announcement, I think many of my colleagues, my peers, my family in fact, I have 4 other siblings and 3 of them were in the civil service. We all left the civil service. But for me, around 2006 then, this idea of getting into education, and I think that was something that looked very purposeful and something that you could continue to contribute in a larger way. So that was when I decided that college might be a good opportunity, and then put up a report to the government. 2007 we started construction, and then 2009 we opened with 300 plus students, and so it's been 11 years since that.
So the introduction of democracy and the abdication of His Majesty the Fourth King, those triggered the plans in you to move from civil service to private sector, is that?
Yes, as did I think a lot of people who were there in the civil service at that time. I know so many people, within a few years of that, I think something really shifted, and that sense that there are other ways that you can contribute.
Is that then because you felt that you could have greater impact and do greater service to the country outside the bureaucracy, or is it really the fear of the uncertain leadership?
I think it may have to do with the latter. I think, in the previous system, it was very clear. You worked hard, you did what you could, and there's a certain meritocracy there, which was very well accepted and established. Now you're going into a new system where, in the past the ministers were always appointed from the civil service. So you knew that was your pathway to, get to a director or wherever. In the new system, the government is now, we have no idea what it might be like.
So after almost a decade now into private sector, which one do you find more fulfilling, and where do you think you have achieved a lot more and achieved greater impact for the country, as a civil servant in BPC or as this educational entrepreneur?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that, but I think it's, I would say in both areas lah. Because while I was in government, in the Department of Power, in the PPC, most of us, all of us, really gave it all lah. And we really believed in what we were doing. And the same thing here lah, in RTC. I really believe in what we are doing. And when you give it a heart and soul, I think you see the impact. And to say where was it more, I really, it's a little difficult.
But in private sector, I suppose there is certainly greater room for innovation and creativity and your own hard work, whereas the civil service system has a structure in place. So moving on to that now, let me join this with the hot topic of our time. That's COVID-19. Now, here at Bhutan Dialogues, we always say we created this platform to sort of further the extent of our thoughts. And these days, I think there is even more need for us to do thinking about our existential status. In fact, the COVID-19 seemed to have revealed to us quite a lot about our vulnerabilities as a human species. It has exposed our mistaken priorities, perhaps. I think it has also revealed to us virtuous actions of heroism, particularly among the frontline service providers. But it has also exposed some ugly human weaknesses, such as stockpiling toilet paper. So it is a time when we see humanity going through such difficult challenges, and you are leading a major educational institution here. As a private entrepreneur and educationist, you have the freedom also to adapt to the situation. How do you look at the COVID situation in general, and how have you addressed the new challenges that COVID has brought to RTC?
Nice. I was in self-quarantine for 2 weeks, so I had a lot of time to read and think. And on the big picture side, what really struck me is how unprecedented this is. For the first time in human history, we are all experiencing this thing, something together. All countries, no one is spared. I think nothing like this has happened. In that sense, it is historic. It's never happened before. And as a historian yourself, we tend to think of history in gradual shifts and moves, but it's also about these big shocks and inflection points. And I feel like we are at a huge inflection point in history, and we will, I think, in future be talking about post-COVID and after COVID, pre-COVID and after COVID, because I think the world is really going to change now. So that is a situation where I think the quicker we recognize and move and adapt to that, I think the better prepared we are. That's my understanding on the large scale. I think on a more human scale or a scale in the nation, I think we've been very lucky here in Bhutan to have been spared any kind of immediate suffering in terms of fatalities related directly to COVID. But I think there is the suffering that is happening and will continue in terms of the job loss, in terms of the fear, in terms of the impacts that this is going to have. So that is something that I am worried about. I think our leadership has done a fantastic job in making sure that we are safe. I am amazed and I'm extremely grateful to the way His Majesty is traveling around and making sure that we are secure, making sure not just that we don't get the disease, but that we have enough stocks, that we are well fed, so that we don't have to fear. And I don't think anything of this kind is happening anywhere else in the world. So in as much as we are in difficult times, we also have to really appreciate how fortunate we are to be in Bhutan and to be Bhutanese citizens.
But if you look at the general discussion and information that we find, we are in a way bombarded with health and hygiene related information to COVID-19, but there's very little discussion going on about COVID-19 in general, taking a life perspective, taking a development perspective. So you just mentioned about post-COVID or going on with COVID. How do we see our way forward? We can't be stuck in this situation forever.
Yes.
And RTC, I actually was having a conversation with one of your deans just a few hours ago, and you have moved all your courses online now. It
Yes,
seems
sir.
like you're already functioning fully
Yes,
in
sir.
spite of the COVID inconveniences. So please.
Yes, sir. So on that point, I think when we first got that order from the government on 6th March to close down the institutions, we thought it might be a stopgap, short-term measure. So 1 or 2 days we were all in a state of shock. Of course, it was over the weekend, so we didn't do much. But very quickly we realized that this may be the new normal. So within a few days, we decided to actually embrace this change. And I think I had by that time, I was already, I think, in a quarantine, and I had a conference call with the executives there. And my message to them was that, there have been a lot of things that we've been wanting to do, which we've not been able to do. Here is the opportunity. We've been talking about online education. We've been talking about students taking ownership of their own learning, being more independent. So the message to them was that, can we move ahead and embrace this not as a stopgap, but as an integral part now of our business model and how we would be offering courses. So we are with the view that this may go on for many weeks and many months, and we don't know how long. So if we engage now with the challenge now and make ourselves strong, then no matter what happens, there may be another wave of a pandemic or another pandemic, something else may come up, but we need to be resilient, and which means that we need to adapt all our systems and structures to be able to continue offering the teaching learning experience to our students. So from then very early on, we formed a task force which has been meeting now almost every day. I think they've met about 15 times, and immediately identified what we need to do. So one immediately was the infrastructure constraints in terms of the IT infrastructure that we have. We already luckily have a Moodle-based virtual learning environment, a VLE, which we upgraded. We had to do then refresher training for our faculty. So we brought them over a weekend because we didn't know whether there would be a lockdown. So 3 days, very intensive, make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then after that, monitoring and follow-up, we got in touch with all our students. We gave them data packages. We bought data packages for all of the students. We surveyed them to find out if they had any difficulties in terms of connectivity and whether they had laptops or mobiles, and intervened. So we got in touch with all the students. And then, of course, there was a lot of difficulty because it's a big change. But I think our messaging has been fairly clear and consistent, is that we are not doing this temporarily. This might be the new normal, and we just need to get on with it. So we've now managed to reach a level where I think we've learned a lot. We have a dedicated group of people who are looking at what is happening outside. So one good thing about this situation is that it's not just in Bhutan. Every institution is facing the same challenge. So if we can research, look and learn, talk to them, there are things that certain institutions are doing better than others. They have innovated, and so can we adopt those? And so we're trying to do those. And in fact, we've done quite a bit, and we are trying to also now look ahead and say, how do we guarantee the integrity of the assessments? What about labs? What about other kinds of things which we had to do in person all the time? And I think we are coming up with ideas, and we are also documenting what we're doing, so that in case there are some practices which we find that are very valuable, we would like to share that, and so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think we moved quite a lot, and I think now we're at a stage where I remember maybe a week or two ago, we had some difficulty in some courses being, fully going online. We had about 80%, but now we're at 100%. We're fully online, and everything is happening, and we are quite satisfied that we're able to engage our students. Of course, there are a lot of difficulties. I will not deny that, a lot of frustration, but I think these are teething problems, and we will get to a situation where we're at least able to continue in a reasonable manner.
That's really admirable. RTC has emerged as a leading higher education institution in the country, and I'm sure you have faced so many challenges in the past And there is this new challenge that's universal, and you are, I think, at the forefront of Bhutan's higher education institutions in addressing that. I also work as an academic and I'm familiar with how things works, and even in very advanced, prestigious Western universities that I know of, they have had this challenge. Now, when you look at the general higher education institution system in Bhutan, it's a very recent one, with the first university only being instituted in 2003. A lot of our colleges would still not have the pre-COVID system in place properly. And now we are sort of having an additional challenge of adjusting to the COVID situation, the new normal, as you put it. If you were, say, the Prime Minister, who is the chairperson of the University Council, or the Vice Chancellor, whoever is the most critical person in the University, Royal University of Bhutan, what would be the few things that you would change in the system, in the structure of the organization and management, in the policies, in the curriculum or assessment? How would you help other colleges across the country, in other words? How would you help them learn also these new solutions to the COVID crisis?
Yes. I think that's a very important question, Doctor. And I would actually like to take it probably a step further and not just look at higher education. I have some ideas of what immediately that we can do to alleviate some of the pressing issues in higher education. Maybe I'll come to that, some suggestions. But I would like to frame sort of higher education within the larger ecosystem of education.
Yes.
And higher education doesn't work in a vacuum. So for me, when I reflect back on some of the challenges we faced, I remember fairly clearly that in 2009 when we started, we had a different idea of how we would like to deliver education, get the students much more involved, make it much more student-centric, get them to be more independent. So this is there in our vision statement, to make them independent, lifelong learners who are well-rounded, responsible citizens.
Yes.
And so from that we draw our mandates and our mission of how we would like to treat them. And so, when we started, we realized very early on that the students wanted something different. They wanted to know what would come in the exam. They wanted to know what the right answer to this question is. And it was frustrating because our approach was more about asking the right questions rather than having the right answer. But then they've been conditioned for 12 years in that manner. So it almost felt like, in order to get to where you are in those 3 or 4 years, you have to undo quite a lot of what was taking place there.
So schooling was interfering in your education in a way.
In a sense, the idea that we had for how our graduates would leave, we had to accept that they have come with a certain baggage. And now in no way am I criticizing the system. It has evolved, it has reached a certain stage, it has served us well. But I do wonder sometimes that maybe is it time to do some stock taking and for us to question how is it that students have landed up. So the same question goes for example, maybe when somebody says, how come your graduates are not able to do certain things? So it's not just graduates, but it's the high school, the middle school, and right down. So it's, I think, partly to do with the entire education approach. And one of the things that I had pointed this out in the reports that we had written when we were, submitting for establishing RTC, as well as throughout all my conversations, is I think fundamentally we really have to look at the system that we have, where we are always looking for the right answer. Where we are always, students have to, it's based on textbooks, memorization, rote learning, very exam-centric. And so our students become good at taking exams. But the question is, have they learned what you want them to learn? And so we have to go back to those fundamentals, because trying to do a different kind of education at the higher level becomes extremely difficult, almost impossible, without addressing that.
But that's a much bigger challenge, bigger issue in a way. But
Yes.
for this specific time when we are facing the COVID problems, I'm sure quite a lot of the higher education institutions across the country would want to know new ways of doing things, maybe things that RTC is already doing. And because you're in the private sector anyway, you have a free hand to do and design things, whereas they're in a very fixed institutional structure with lots of do's and don'ts.
Yes.
So are there some really important things that you can recommend in terms of institutional structure or resources, things that they need to really tweak to respond to the COVID situation effectively?
Yes. So I don't know whether it's got to specific with COVID, but even in a general sense, I think as a private institution, there are lots of pluses and minuses.
Yes.
And I'm always grateful for the freedom for us to be able to act in a certain way. And I know the constraints that the government colleges face. One of the things that motivates us as a private institution and that we have to always keep in mind is that we are there for the students. So that is our starting point. And I'm not sure, whether you can translate that the same thing for the government college. The government college exists and the students come to them because of the way the funding mechanism is. Ours is not. Ours is, we have to offer something that is of enough value that the parents and the students feel that they're making this investment. So all our thoughts and activities have to center around what value are we creating? What do we need to do? So that means our ears have to be very close to the ground here. So we have to do so much more in that sense. And also allows us to do so much more because that's what we have to do to exist or to survive. So, for example, even before the students come in, we are already looking at their marks and saying, yes, you admitted, but looks like you might need some help with English or math. And we do that. We have bridge courses before they even enter the college. As soon as they enter, we have orientation, we have advisors, we have a special course called Orientation to College Learning, which we have formulated ourselves. We have a learning resource center. We have a wider variety of programs. Our whole job is to actually try and support their learning and to try and facilitate and push them up as much as possible. Another view might be that other colleges might be looking at, okay, who do I not let pass to the next level? That might be one way of looking at it. So you have difficult exams and you're not so worried about whether they pass through. Our motivation, of course, is not lowering standards, but how can we help them? How can we support them? What scaffolding do we have in our structures and the way we operate? So right from even from attendance, where we keep monthly track, even their parents know, and if they're short of attendance, they get a notice from our academic staff saying you're liable to be debarred from attending your finals because you're running short, so and so forth. So a lot of these things, which in some ways is too much hand-holding, but yet is necessary because that's the kind of constituents that we're dealing with. And then if they're struggling and if they have not passed the exams, then we have winter school, where we don't just make them sit directly for the exams, but put them through this process where they have a higher chance then of passing the exam. So we have to do a lot more. I think one area that we've done well is our international programs.
Yes.
I think that is one area where we have, beyond actually our initial expectations, we have been very, very successful, and I'm extremely pleased with that. In 2019, we had 45 international students on campus, which provides such good diversity for the campus, the students living there. By the same token, we've sent out 76 students and faculty to our partner institutions in Europe, the US, Japan. Even as of now, and this is a bit of a struggle, we have 18 students who are on long-term programs studying in the US, in Europe, in Japan, and of course the difficulty now is a lot of them want to come back. But we have 18 of them out there at no additional cost. They just pay the local tuition here, and then we do these neutral exchanges. But these are the kinds of opportunities we have to afford our students to make worth their while to come to RTC, and perhaps those are challenges that other institutions don't face. So we have to be much more innovative in that sense.
Yes. As somebody working in higher education, I would say, I'm not here promoting RTC or anything, but RTC has achieved many outstanding milestones. I would say you have got A+ grading by Bhutan Accreditation Council in 2016. the international exposure to your students is far, far greater than any of the other colleges. And for the last 3 years or so, you had somebody top the civil service exams in one of the 3 categories they have. I think similarly, you've been also very generous in providing scholarships. I hear there are some 18% or so of students, new students, being given some kind of scholarship. So all admirable. But I have a much bigger question for you with regard to higher education or education as a whole, and that is in relation to employability.
Nice.
So RTC gets some 350 to 400 new students each year, it seems, and maybe about 80% of the same number graduates 3 or 4 years later. So say 300 students being churned out of your institution into the job market. And there is a lot of question being asked by the society about the employability of these people. You could probably sort of blame this 12-year school cycle for not producing capable citizens, but 4 years in college also has a major role. So when we look at the employability of students, and in RTC's case, again, I called up one of your deans and he shared that about 50% of your graduates get employed after 10 months or so, roughly. Now, even if we had to take that figure, 50%, some 150 graduates of RTC each year end up not finding a job. And probably a lot of them are going to Australia if they get an opportunity. So do we really need a 4-year education just to go and do some manual work in Australia? What are we doing to solve this issue of unemployability or not having capable graduates that are required in the market?
Yes, I think again that's a very important question now, because we do owe an explanation to our graduates, their parents, people who are funding them, that what do they get after 3 years? Are they employable? Are they not employable? And I think this is the big debate that's been going around. So of course, one thing is that it's not just RTC graduates; it's graduates in general. And if you look at if you do tracer studies for where graduates in general from whatever institutions around the country, where are they after 10 months or 18 months, I think we are pretty much in the same situation. Again, I have to come back to that part of, the way our students are conditioned and their own expectations that we would like them to be, after they've graduated, to have a certain knowledge, skills, attitude that will lead them to, that will facilitate them fulfilling their full potential. So I think critical to that, and this is where I need to come back to education, is this aspect of critical thinking, being able to think for themselves, being able to question, so that if we can build that in right from when they are young, and if there is a sort of love of learning. So what happens when I look at the situation is that by the time they're getting to class, kids are getting to class 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, some of these kids are dreading school. They see school as something very difficult, that an education is something that is a very difficult task. Why is it that happens? Because kids, as we know, they love learning actually. They're little machines that absorb all sounds and sights and smells and touch, and when they are 2, 3, 4, 5, they're so curious, but somehow when they start going to school, the system seems to dampen that curiosity, that inquisitiveness, and then maybe it becomes, even for some, fear. So can we change that? Can we change it to a system where we go with this sort of inquisitiveness that they have, sort of more inquiry-based, that you allow them to follow what they're curious about, and through that you teach them some of the things that you might need to teach them. And then I'm glad that, for example, we are not going, I don't know, I'm not very clear on this, but I think I read somewhere that we might not be having tests or exams up to the 3rd grade. I think that's fantastic, because we should not be stigmatizing these kids, saying you're pass or fail or you're high or low at such a young age. They should just enjoy being there, exploring, loving it. And I think if they can have that sets a really good foundation then for them to explore, and then we build on that. So I think fundamentally that's one thing that I would like to think that we need to start looking at that, of what we are doing at that level. I'm not saying that I'm not responsible, at higher education, all the troubles are,
But
not that.
Another way of looking at this, Director Tenzing, is would you then want to actually go into school education as well? Would you want to create feeder schools that would produce the kind of college students you want?
Absolutely. I think that, to me, you can make the biggest impact at that level.
So,
And further,
opening schools?
no, I'm not. I know how difficult it is to run one. So, but in fact, that was my initial idea before the college. I wanted to do a school, and I think the quicker earlier you can get them, the more you can mold them, the better you can do. So the investment that you make in the early years, the payout is much more. So in as much as, for example, the current government has, I forget what it's called, the golden, I don't know how many months, 12 months, 24 months, where the child is, taken care of, immunized, so and so, and maybe even you give some payouts to the mothers to take care. I think that's fantastic, because those payouts further down, as the 10th year, the 20th year, it pays back so much more. As you move up, the returns are incremental, it's less and less and less. So the interventions in the early years, I think, are absolutely critical. Perhaps I'm in the wrong area to be there in that way. The returns are very marginal, but nonetheless, I'm sort of realizing that is where I think the payback is the greatest.
So now talking about employability further, to look at it from a different angle. A lot of young people, educated young adults from Bhutan are going to places like New York to do things that they are fully capable of doing here in the country. Giving care, keeping houses. Now, so it's not all down to capability or skills. It's really also down to the market.
Yes.
We have been leading the private sector development study. And when you look at Bhutan's economic situation as a whole, or market in general, what is going wrong that we can't employ our people for the same job that they would do elsewhere? Is there any way we can incentivize them the same way they're incentivized in Australia or the US? What do we have to do to take Bhutan to that economic level, that these same jobs can be done here and people can be retained?
Yes. Doctor, I think there's two things here. One is that it comes down to what they're earning.
Yes.
So definitely for the same job they would earn much more in Australia or New York, babysitting some baby, they would earn so much more. And that may be the calculus when somebody decides to go. But there's another, and which has got to do with purpose and meaningful work. And I am pretty sure that if there was something meaningful and purposeful, something that where they thought they were using their talents, even for a fraction of what they might get outside, they would be willing to stay here. And I think to me, that is the challenge. The other one you can't prevent. If somebody really wants to make more money and feels that he has a job lined up there somewhere where he can make X amount of dollars for doing some low-skilled job, you will find that. But I think the challenge for us is more about how do we keep the others? Can we create an environment where somebody who has an idea, somebody who would like to do something, he can really do it. And unfortunately, in that report that we wrote up, I think one of the prognosis, the statements that we have out there is that the business ecosystem that we have here in Bhutan is very burdensome and very unpredictable. And so what that means is that some young idealistic entrepreneur thinking of starting some business somewhere has his bright ideas, full of energy and promise. He starts running to one office, he's sent to another office, he's told to fill this paperwork, and then he gets to that area, comes back, and then suddenly he's told, no, this is not on the list, you can't do it. And it crushes his dreams. And then he tries something else, and it's just so hard to, so it's a very unpredictable system, it's quite burdensome. And so when people talk,
red tape, as they call it.
Yes, I think there is a lot of that. And I think one of the key proposals in the report was that we really need to look at this. The framing of this, a lot of people say, like have told me in RTC, for example, is don't add to the problem by putting more graduates into the market. We already have enough unemployed graduates. And my retort to them is, can we reframe this issue? Is it about too many graduates in the market? Or can I also reasonably ask that why isn't the economy able to generate jobs so that my graduates can get jobs? So rather than blame the graduates, can we look at what's wrong in the economy? What is holding back the creation of new enterprises that create jobs where our graduates can be employed? So you could easily frame it that way. But when you start to ask the question in that way, then you start seeing, oh, wait a minute, we need to maybe lighten the bureaucracy's touch. We need to be a little lighter here in the licensing. We need to have less arbitrary rules and regulations. We need to streamline our policies. Agencies need to be talking to each other. We need to get rid of all the conflicting paperwork that is necessary. So I think we start seeing a path, if you frame the problem that way, that what is stopping. And what I would suggest actually is that if we do this, it's not just the business sector or the private sector or the enterprises that will benefit. I think the example that we pointed out in the paper is that the farmer in the village, he has to run around. Same amount of paperwork to transfer his census, transfer his land, get his rural timber, whatever. The burden is very heavy. So I think if we can look to reduce that, it's not just the business sector that will benefit, but society as a whole. So the national burden in that sense can be alleviated if we look at what is holding us back. We have so many rules and regulations that are holding us back, and I think if we can look at that, that would be a tremendous service to the nation as a whole.
No, I think as a remark to the person who asked you to not produce more graduates that are not able to be employed in the market, I would say, even if you don't do it, lovely Punjab University is doing it 10 times more.
Yes.
So there's every reason for local colleges, I think, to keep students at home and give, if possible, a better education than a lot of the institutes that we find outside. I believe not really up to the standard. But coming back to the issue of the economy, I think going on to get a job with high financial incentives in Australia, actually makes good sense. We do have to nonetheless ask, why are we not on the same standard to pay the same amount of money? But even more depressing than that, that I found recently in the past few months is we have young people going to places like Iraq. And what is there in Iraq that is more meaningful, that's better than Bhutan? It's pure desperation that have driven people from Bhutan to work in places like Iraq. So there must be something fundamentally going wrong with our economy. You're basically saying that giving more freedom to the private sector would help sort of boost the economy. But what would be some practical tips to do that? And can you also sort of join the dots? If the private sector were given more freedom, how is that really going to result in the creation of more jobs, creation of higher incomes? There is every likelihood that some wealthy businessmen will make a huge lot of profit. In the society as a whole may not gain anything.
Yes. If you look at the rules and regulations that exist, there is this idea that, how to put it, government knows best. So government has this list of activities that you can engage in. And you see this over and over again. So you see, for example, we pointed this out in the report, there is a positive list of, if you're going to engage in any of these activities, you don't need environmental clearance. But if you're going to engage anything not on the list, then you have to start moving through, you have to start doing the paperwork and seeing whether you can get on that list. That list itself limits us. And I think that is fundamentally the problem that we have. If you look at there's a report by the World Economic Forum in 2018 that stated something like 65% of students entering primary education today will be in jobs that don't exist right now. What it is telling you is that, we don't know what the jobs of the future are going to be, what kind of industries are going to come. And so we have to be much more open to changes and what might impact us. Now, when you have a list that says you can only do this in the entire universe of things that can happen, you're really limiting yourselves there. So someone might have a bright idea of, I would like to do this, but it's not on that list. So you have a positive list in the NDC, you have the FDI list, you have the CSI list, you have stock listing. It is proliferated everywhere. Everybody has their own favorite positive list, and if you don't fall in those lists, then you have to jump around so much. And so our proposal is, instead of having, because we can never know, in your books you might think that this is not good for the economy, or you might you have a judgment about that. But in someone else's books, he may think it's worthwhile. And you limit yourselves sometimes by having those lists. So the idea was that we were proposing was, can you actually have a negative list? Or what would you not like? So you not like gambling, tobacco, arms and ammunition, so on and so forth. Be very clear. Nobody ventures into those areas. But in other areas, generally, you have a liberal approach. Yes, if it is very unknown, then you might have a sort of a sandbox approach. You play with it, and then you develop regulations as you learn. But not a blanket. If you're not on this list, you can't do it. I think that is extremely limiting, and that is, I think, one of the reasons why we don't see growth in. So there's a new business model comes in, people are doing some things with the new technology, and then you want to do something with that, but then you're told, no, this is not on the list, and you don't know about this. So in that sense, the mind of bureaucrats will go back to what is written. If it's not there, black and white, you will not be allowed. Or they don't want to take a call because they may be exposed to if something goes wrong. So I think those kinds of dynamics come into play, which when you add all of these little things up, then it builds you a system which, I come back, is very burdensome and unpredictable. And which is why perhaps we are not seeing the growth of the private sector in the way that we would like. So for the last 3 decades, we've been told that the private sector is the engine of growth, but we don't see it happening there.
And this was even before COVID.
This was before COVID, yes.
So now with COVID, we have given additional burden and additional challenges, and I think we are living in really vulnerable times. I know I'm enjoying the conversation so much, I didn't know it's almost an hour. But as we go through these really challenging times, one of the most important things that health experts tell us is that we need a strong immune system. So Rashu, what do you do to keep your immune system strong? What do you do to look after your body and mind, your emotions and your spirituality? Can you share how you keep yourself fit and how to work things done?
Yes. I think I've been very lucky. I was brought up loving sports and I love the outdoors, so I'm very active. Anybody who knows me knows I'm very active. So I love playing sports. I love cycling, running, football, golf, swimming, so on and so forth. So physical activity, I think, is a big part of who I am, what I do, what I love, and that really keeps me, I think, quite healthy. I also like reading, meditating, reflecting. I think these activities help me also to center myself, and so I think mentally, also I feel, reading. That's something that always brings you back. Especially I like reading some of the spiritual books, self-help books also, some of them. They help you to think and reflect, and I don't know, I don't do much else. I don't in particular say I need to be healthy and take care of my health, but I feel healthy because of, I'm always busy also, so I don't, I can't find time to, I can't remember the last time I said I'm bored. So maybe I'm just busy.
So keeping active.
Yes.
So thank you, Rashu, for that advice. And of course, this is not to substitute for the health advice we get on how we should do physical distancing and also wash our hands with soap regularly and so forth. Now, with that, let's take questions from the online audience.
So the first question we have from Self-Censorship. Can 21st century education be like learning of true nature of one's consciousness and self, then exposing too much of concepts and ideas of what schools, colleges and institutions are focused now?
So, Doctor, if you paraphrase that, seems more like your type of jargon you might be familiar with.
If I understood it correctly, should 21st century education be more about self-inquiry rather than ideas and philosophies being imposed on you by the colleges and schools?
Yes.
I think it should be both. I really don't think these are separate and mutually exclusive. One thing I would say is that sometimes the inner journey is much more personal, and it also has to be experienced. In education institutions, we are sometimes taught. It is the guru or the teacher or through the books. It's a learned kind of a wisdom, but I think the inner journey is much more experiential. Without going through that, I find it hard to believe that we can gain that kind of wisdom. So if you look at all the great teachers, Buddha himself or Christ or Muhammad or whoever have you, they have gone through this personal, integral to their philosophy or what they preach is also the inner transformation that they have gone through. And I think all of us have to go through that in order to earn that wisdom. So I think there's something that the situation is set up where we learn something in a formal education setting, but the inner journey, I think that is much more personal. Maybe some might need a guru to help them through that, others can do it on their own. But I think this might be a better question for Doctor than for me.
I can certainly augment what you have shared, and that is, I think, one, for sure, inner reflection or self-reflection is fundamental for education. But a lot of the college and school education should contribute towards better astuteness in self-inquiry. So I think they feed each other.
Yes.
And especially, I must say, the COVID situation has given us a fantastic opportunity for self-reflection. Lots of people around the world, I think, are going through very serious existential contemplation right now.
Yes.
Because it has really laid bare our vulnerabilities. And so, everyone, I would request, to take time to sit back and sort of look inward and contemplate a bit, practice mindfulness, and that also boost immune system, they say.
Absolutely.
The second question is from Florian Delkesiu. The recent virus outbreak has highlighted the interdependence of economies across the world. Here in Europe, immediately fears arose of possible breaks in supply chains, most notably in food. As I understand, even in Bhutan, the chilies are becoming increasingly expensive right now, together with various challenges in importing other raw materials. This points to questions of self-sufficiency and orientation of the job market. What do you think the scope or reach of higher education should be in Bhutan?
That's for you,
I'm mostly honest, I'm not very clear what exactly the preface to that question and the question itself slightly...
Is it disconnect?
So the second part, I can understand the question, but then I'm trying to relate it to the first part. I'm not sure the chilies and the self-sufficiency and
again, it might be rephrased. I think this is Florence who was an intern at Loden.
Okay.
So hello, Florence. I think he is basically trying to point out the interconnectivity of the whole world and then the scope of higher education. So should maybe the interconnectedness that the world has, which has become very stark today, should that come under this scope of higher education in a bigger way? Or instead of just building skills or building personal capacities, what should the scope of higher education be in a slightly broader way to understand the complexity of life? I don't know if I catch up for this question, but there would be.
I don't know that the way. Maybe I'll try to answer it in a way where I'm talking about education again, coming back. To me, not just higher education, but education itself, the way I view the purpose of education is twofold. One is to make you able to learn for yourself, so to become a lifelong learner. And that actually you don't even need to get to higher education. I think if you have literacy skills and numeracy skills by the time you are in the 5th or 6th grade, you can actually, if you're motivated enough, learn on your own. You don't need any more. So that's, I think, one fundamental purpose. The other is really to get you to think critically, think for yourself. And there you may need some help further up, and maybe ideas of the different strands of philosophy, different lines of thought, to be able to help you figure out yourself. And at the end of the day, I think if we can do these two things, which is get you to become a lifelong learner and get you to think for yourself, to think critically, I think to me that, in a nutshell, would be for me the value or the proposition or what education is there for.
But these two things don't necessarily include creating a good human being. Right? People can be lifelong learner, people can be also, but still be very selfish, very antisocial persons. So how would you, in an education system, also address this issue of creating good human beings, good citizens? And perhaps this is what Royal is referring to, this understanding of humanity.
Doctor, I think that's a fantastic question. So I might say think critically, but I would maybe just limit it to just to think. The value of a good education. And to think means you decide what you think, how you think. You decide what you have in your mind. So in that sense, it also defines who you are. So in as much as it's not just about ideas, but it's also that awareness of how you're thinking. What are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking in this way or that way. So a certain mindfulness and awareness. And to know that we have certain ways of thinking, that we have certain default settings. I was reading this speech given at a commencement. I don't know if you've ever heard it. This is water. I don't know if you've heard of that. So it's a quick story. There are two fish swimming in the sea, and two young fish swimming in the sea. One of the fish swims by and passes them by, and he looks back at the two of them and he says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And the fish swim on. After a while, the two young fish look at each other. One looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" So the idea of this story is that sometimes we are so steeped in our own thoughts or the default settings that we don't even realize how we're thinking. And to me, I think this is what the value of a good education is, that also it makes you aware of that, wait a minute, I am like this. I don't have to be like this. I can believe what I choose to believe, not just what was handed down to me. And so when I say critically thinking, then you add that part of being critical about what was handed down to you, what you were told, what you've read, and you make your own truth there. And I think if you can do that, that is then really knowing how to think, and that is the value of a good education. So to get away from this default settings that we always have all the time, that we wear around us, and you don't even know how we react sometimes. So in as much as the fish might not even know that they're living in water, I think that's said. So it also calls for then mindfulness and how we treat others and how we view ourselves as self-awareness of, when I do this, I impact somebody else like that. So to me, that is part of that thinking. So it comes very much in that aspect.
Next question.
So next we have 4 questions on COVID-19. The first one is, what are the key areas private entrepreneurs need to focus at this hour pre-course, during course, and post-course of COVID-19 situation to successfully sail through the wave of pandemic situation? And the next one is, Have you given thought to the possibility that COVID-19 is here to stay? And how are you going to deal with it and live with it? The third one is, what suggestions would you have for the COVID-19 library services? How are the faculty and students able to access the teaching learning resources at the moment? And the last one is, COVID-19 situation in Bhutan have already taken the physical school now in the context of Google Classroom and in the e-learning. How do you foresee this throughout this year 2020 if the COVID-19 situation doesn't improve?
Yes. So, that's all got to do with the COVID-19.
Private sector and education. So perfect questions for you.
Anyway, I'm not an expert on the COVID-19 situation. I'm not a healthcare expert or anything, but from what I've read, the situation seems to be that it's something that is going to last for a while before a vaccine comes in, and I think till there's enough herd immunity in the system so that it doesn't destabilize whatever activities that are happening, but that's quite a long ways out. But in the meantime, I think from what I could tell, the critical pressure on the infrastructure is when it comes to intensive care. So, for example, right now, in Bhutan, we're very lucky. There is actually no pressure on the healthcare system as such in terms of like what you're seeing in Spain or Italy or the US. So there's no filling up of the ICU beds, and they're not in the beds and people are dying. We don't have any of that, very fortunately. So I think the calculations that a lot of countries are doing is seeing how many ICU beds are there and working backwards to see what level of social distancing and all of these interventions are required in order to keep infections at a certain level, because there is an understanding that you cannot get it down and you can only kind of continue to a certain level by increasing or decreasing the amount of social distancing and lockdown and other measures that are there. So how tight is it and how loose, how much can you let go? So I think each country has to find its own containment strategy of how much can it afford to do. And perhaps at some point in Bhutan, we might need to come up with a framework that says that when we go beyond this many infections or this many cases, we have to completely lock down, and when it goes below that, then we can loosen up. I don't know whether those kind of calculations are there in the framework that our policymakers are looking at. But it seems like in other countries there is this kind of a strategy. And what it suggests is that this is not going away immediately. Even if you get a handle on the situation, it may come back in a few months, and again then you tighten, and then again it may come back. So in that sense, I think this is a situation, even if it's not COVID-19, it may be some other new novel coronavirus that might come in, and you may have another wave. So we have to build systems that are now resilient to these kinds of waves. So this is what I was saying when I was talking about the new normal. So our systems, whatever we're talking about, needs to anticipate those kinds of ebbs and flows that might come out.
Yes, the first question was about private enterprises. How do they manage pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID situations?
So I think that really depends now on the nature of the enterprise that you're in. And I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all response. So some enterprises will thrive, are thriving. So you're looking at, for example, delivery services, the orders have gone through the roof. And then you're looking at some situations where if you require close contact, those things are now closed off, the theaters and where people gather in large numbers. So each will now have to look and review and see how they can keep those kinds of social distancing norms that may keep coming in now in the future. How can they alleviate? So business models will definitely be impacted, and they'll have to change. And those that adapt will survive. Those that don't will have to find other ways of serving their customers. So really, I don't think there's a simple, single answer on that front.
But if I may add one, I think where possible, enterprises must adopt digital tools. Because we are in a digital era. A lot of people still are perhaps shying away from digital tools, but for most businesses, I think digital tools manage the enterprises to keep alive and perhaps even flourish.
Yes, yes.
And on the library and teaching virtual e-learning issues,
Yes.
the question is about how will that be provided.
Yes. So, for example, at RTC in the VLE, a lot of the stuff is posted there for the reading material, and then we also, I'm not sure of the technical details, but we are part of this network, this high-speed network within the country, the TrueCren, which allows institutions to access each other's resources, and the libraries, the resources that we have. Technically, I'm not sure how it's working in RTC, but I do know that a lot of the materials that we had, for example, we had to redeploy a lot of people to just photocopy and put in the database to make available what are the most required material. We have access to international library databases, and normally for that you have to come into the library will help you, they help you with research and things like that. But I'm not entirely sure about students directly accessing some of those resources.
Next, Jerry.
I'm always interested in practical insights and tips. Practical insights and tips.
Yes.
So I have two questions today. The first one is going back to what you said earlier on in this session, the importance of asking the right question.
Yes.
So my first question to you is, given the fact that you hire a lot of people, what is the most important question you regularly ask when you're interviewing people? What's that key question that you always or invariably ask people, because you know that this person is going to be on your staff for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? So that question that helps you get to a comfort level that this is the right person for your team. That's my first question.
Okay.
My second question is, many of us, and I speak now as a bureaucrat within the United Nations, sometimes we self-censor ourselves too much. We're a little bit too careful. But of course you are an accomplished leader here in this country. How do you get around the self-censoring that may sometimes hold you back? How do you allow yourself to be braver than you actually want to be sometimes? And in terms of asking the right question, saying things that maybe make some people feel a little bit uncomfortable. So the second question is, how do you get beyond self-censoring?
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. With regard to the one question, I don't think there's a single question. And often you can't ask it directly. So you have to find a way to, so for example, what I look out for, probably two or three things. In their history, in what they've accomplished, in the way they've reached where they have reached, are they improving, are they learning? I think to me that is fundamental, and which is why we have it described in our vision also at RTC, lifelong learning. I think to me that is extremely important. If a person is not looking to learn or not looking to improve, then I think he has very limited scope for employment with someone like me. He has to be looking to improve himself, which means he has to be looking to engage, looking to be challenged, because learning is challenging, it's not easy. So if you have shown a consistent history record of learning, I think that is fundamental. And often you have to look at the experience and the record history of that person. I think the second would be down to integrity. And again, you can't ask that question, because if I ask you the question, Jerry, do you have integrity and you want the job, you're sure to say yes. So again, that is a more difficult question. And often even through an interview, you cannot get that. That is something that you learn maybe perhaps when you engage with that person. So I think these two, I mean, there are a few more, but I would say these two are fundamental. If you cannot trust that person, and if that person is not willing to learn, then I think you're going to have a very difficult time. On the other hand, if there's a person, even without a high-flying degree or so-called education, if he's willing to learn and if he has integrity, he can reach whatever level he or she wishes. That's my evaluation of when I'm looking to employ somebody there. There are other areas, but I think these are probably two. I just keep it at that right now. The other question about self-censorship. I think, Jerry, within the context that we operate, there are ways and means in which we communicate with each other. And I think particularly in our context, there are certain expectations of how we communicate at certain levels, laterally or vertically. And I think we have to respect that also, so your place, where you are. But of course, you want to make an impact. You do want to communicate whatever your message is. And in that sense, it may sometimes feel like self-censorship, that you don't say everything. But I think also we are a society that people also do read between the lines and they do understand also. So you may ask this level of question and they know you're actually trying to get there. So you don't need to say that in order to get there also sometimes. So part of it is that I think cultural dynamic that we have, he said this, but he actually means that. And it might sound like self-censorship, but it's also maybe an astute way of getting there. Because if you go straight there, then maybe you'll just get, you might not be heard at all. So I think certain ways and means to get your message across there.
Right form of speech. My final question is, Bhutan Dialogues offers 2 books as a token of gratitude. I want to ask you which 2 books you choose,
Yes.
or if you have other titles that you would want to recommend the audience to read. Here are 2 books that I think probably selected by you.
Yes. So the first one is this: Why Don't Students Like School? And I read some other books, and I had read some references and reviews to this, so I've been trying to get hold of this book, but not so easy, so I thought maybe UN House might be able to be more efficient in getting it. The second one is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. I really enjoyed his books, Sapiens, Homo Deus, which I haven't finished yet, but very insightful, and I was looking forward to reading this, especially as we look ahead and try and think about future challenges that might arise. So these are the 2 books which I requested for. And I really don't have much to say about them because I haven't read them.
Thank you. So with that, brings this session to a close. We want to thank Director Tenzing for giving time and coming here to join us. I normally end the session with a Bhutanese or Buddhist piece of wisdom. Given the COVID situation today, where we really need to look after our body, but also look after our mind, which is very central to the theme of today's session, education and enterprise. I've got Shantideva, my favorite author, who in his book Bodhicharyavatara, he writes, Neki tupi midami lenam kunla tumeba, deshin bombe semtrupa lenam kunla tumedo. A person troubled by illness is not fit for work. A mind disturbed by confusion cannot do any work. So, in these unprecedented times, stay safe, take good care of your body and mind. Thank you.